Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lynn Cancer Institute updates. And as you know, we're trying to keep you in the know in 2023. We're very grateful to have you all with us today and to learn from our very own oncology clinical dietitian, Marie Morande. Marie will be educating us today on nutrition and gut health. A pretty popular topic these days, especially for me, so I'm very grateful to Marie. At the Lynn Cancer Institute, we believe that education, prevention, screening and early detection, the treatment options, expertise of our staff, and latest technology will truly save lives. Nutrition education is an important tool in our health and wellness, and especially prevention. In the interest of time, Marie's bio was sent to you by email. We invite you to please take notes during her presentation. And when you have a question or a comment, please put it in the Q&A box or the chat box, because Marie will not be able to see you or hear you during her presentation. And there will be time at the end for her to respond to everyone. So we're very glad to welcome you to the Lynn Cancer Institute and very proud to welcome or to introduce Marie Morande. Marie?
Thank you, Jan. You're always so kind. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. As Jan mentioned, we're going to be talking about nutrition for a healthy gut. I was surprised I haven't done this recently, or I guess it's been a year or more since we talked about our healthy guts. So I'm very excited to kind of update everybody and discuss what this means today. We're going to go over what is our gut microbiome. That's one terminology that you will see in writings about this. What influence does the microbiome have on our health? What influences the growth of healthy microbiome? And what influence does the gut microbiome have on cancer and cancer treatments? So a little bit of a starting point to explain what the microbiome is. Our microbiome is a collection of trillions of bacteria species that live symbiotically in our gut, so in our GI tract, mostly in the large bowel, but there are some bacteria that start off in the stomach or even our mouths, the stomach, small intestine, but most of the species are in our large intestine. The number of bacteria cells outnumber our cells by a factor of 10, which is shocking and very surprising. I'm not exactly sure who's controlling who. And that's part of the research. The imbalance of gut bacteria is linked to conditions like inflammatory bowel disease or IBS, obesity, diabetes, and maybe even more. So the colonization or the introduction of these bacterial species starts as an infant. In fact, it starts during the delivery process for an infant. So even the type of delivery a baby has can influence their lifelong microbiome in what that looks like. But it can be shaped throughout life and into adulthood. So we do have the opportunity of making some changes and changing that microbiome at any time. How do we benefit from this relationship? A symbiotic means that all benefit. So the bacteria benefit and we benefit. We feed the bacteria, obviously. They use the fibers and the carbohydrates and all the food that we eat as fuel, okay? And for us, bacteria are able to perform many different functions that humans can't. They produce various vitamins. They can synthesize amino acids, which is the building block for protein. They can transform bile. So the intestinal cells interact with the bacteria to influence our immune system. So our immune system a majority of which is in our gut and is specifically influenced by this microbiome. So bacteria can bind and signal the immune system and immune reactions. Like I said, their fuel source is the carbohydrates and the foods that we eat. So they're going to metabolize those things that we can't. Polysaccharides, resistant starches, cellulose, pectins, gums. And it also provides recovery of energy and nutrients for the bacteria, for their bacterial growth. Bacteria will produce antimicrobial compounds and compete with pathogens. So the good, let's say good, quote unquote, bacteria are going to keep the bad bacteria away. And then we have that whole gut-brain communication that influences the gut function itself and response to stress. And this is how researchers are finding that our gut microbiome can influence how we sleep or our appetite hormones as far as obesity goes and other types of inflammation related problems that we have in life. So I think the evidence is growing as far as how important it is to have a diverse, very healthy gut microbiome. So as I said, they can the bacteria can synthesize vitamins. So vitamin B12, thiamine, folate, riboflavin, vitamin K, about 20% of circulating amino acids, lysine, leucine, and threonine in adult humans are synthesized by our gut microbes. Excuse me. And in addition, the microbes are involved in urea nitrogen salvaging. So scavenging and replacing that nitrogen. That's good. So what happens when the microbiome, the bacteria digest and the food source that we provide them? So what they do is you ferment what the indigestible, what's kind of left over, and like I said, in that large bowel, carbohydrates, and they produce what's called short chain fatty acids, specifically butyrate, acetate, propionate. Butyrate actually ends up being a fuel source for the colon cells themselves. They can induce cell death for colon cancer cells and activate intestinal gluconeogenesis, which is the production of glucose from other sources, and maintain oxygen balance and prevent dysbiose. Dysbiose, it means that you don't have really good variety in your gut microbiome. You have an overgrowth of certain types of bacteria, more likely the bad bacteria, that can cause a lot of dysfunction and a lot of maybe the inflammatory bowel syndrome and inflammation. So that dysbiose is really the key problem if we don't have that healthy gut. So propionate transfers to the liver to regulate gluconeogenesis and satiety. Acetate can also regulate our appetite, influence cholesterol and lipid regulation, and it's used by skeletal and cardiac muscle. So these are short-chain fatty acids that we want to be produced and to be absorbed into our bodies for our own health. So it's going to improve and help us. So the more short-chain fatty acids, the less potential for obesity, the less insulin resistance, and better health is basically what we're saying here. So we want the bacteria that are going to ferment carbohydrates and create these short-chain fatty acids. So as I said, what the microbiome are fermenting, what are they feeding off of makes a difference. So if we have a heavy meat and dairy diet, then they're going to ferment that and trimethylamine, which is oxidized by the liver and can be associated with the risk of atherosclerosis. So it's more inflammatory. So that's not the result that we want. So by having a lot of meat and dairy in our diets, unfortunately, we're not getting those fermented byproducts that we want. So we can add to the potential for heart disease, or that's part of the risk of heart disease from these kind of foods. Fermenting dietary fiber produces ideopropionic acid, butyrate, potential radical scavenging activity, which seems to reduce the risk of diabetes. So an opposite, when we have the fiber in our diet, then we can produce that butyrate, those healthy short-chain fatty acids that can scavenge free radicals. It can reduce the risk of damage to cells and reduce that risk of maybe even type 2 diabetes. And anti-inflammatory effects, maintain that gut barrier again, so reduces that oxidative stress in the gut. So high fat diet can contribute to lipopolysaccharide lipids that can traverse, kind of get through the gut into the bloodstream, kind of squeezing their way through, so to speak, between cells, and increase inflammation. So it really does make a difference on the food that we eat, not just for our own health, but for the health and the byproducts that we're getting from these microbiome. So the gut talks to the brain, and like I said, back, and stress has been shown to influence the integrity of the gut, the peristalsis, how it moves, the secretions it makes, the mucin it produces. So probiotic consumption has also been reported to reduce self-reported feelings of sadness and aggression. So again, how we wouldn't think that our gut microbiome can affect our mood, but that's exactly what can happen because of that gut brain, influence, because of the signaling, hormones and things that is produced in the gut that goes straight to the brain. So stress induces gut changes and permeability. The mucus lining of the gut increases inflammation and damage to the gut. So stress itself can make some of these changes, and the microbiome can add to that. So like we said, when we have the wrong kind of foods, then we can get this potential damage. We can get permeability is how the gut is usually fairly close knit, very close cells right next to each other. Permeability mean there would be spaces. It would be really like relaxed, like a loose yarn, where you could get, like I said, some of these byproducts can slip through and cause inflammation inside the bloodstream. Whereas a good tight junction colon cells can keep all of that out. So we want to maintain good gut health. Irritable bowel syndrome has been characterized by abdominal discomfort, pain, change in bowel habits. It is influenced by many different factors. The gut is included in all of that. It can be influenced by inflammation, by genetics, hypersensitivity, infection, and the microbiome. So not everybody who eats terrible is going to have an irritable bowel syndrome, but if you have additional, let's say, food sensitivities or autoimmune concerns, or you had an infection, or you get like this cascade of problems, then you can kind of develop these kind of issues. And alterations in the composition of the gut may facilitate adherence of pathogens or development of IBS symptoms. So a recent study looking at the microbiome of patients starting vedolizumab, which is used to treat irritable bowel syndrome, found a more diverse microbial composition at baseline, predicted better remission. So if you can, and like I said, we can influence and change our gut microbiome fairly quickly, actually. So if we can improve diversity before we even start these medications, or then it would be even more effective. And we're going to actually talk about a similar situation with the cancer treatment. In the case of people with IBS, diet restriction of specific carbohydrates may alleviate the problem. There has been look into the FODMAP diet. So a low FODMAP diet is looking at specific types of sugars And so it's basically simple sugars that can be fermented. The short chain fatty acid produced overstimulate free fatty acid receptors and can change the motility. So the diet restricts oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, polyunsaturates. So it's very small, simple sugars that can kind of disrupt the gut and cause inflammation. In this case, this low FODMAP diet actually does restrict gluten, which would be wheat, specifically, among other things. It does restrict lactose as far as dairy products, and some specific fruits and vegetables, and you can research this further if you have IBS, or this sounds like it might be helpful to kind of manage your symptoms. So I think it's worth a try. This is one of those types of elimination diets where you want to be pretty strict with it for at least 2 weeks, if not 3, and see if you've gotten some type of benefit with your GI health, and then decide, are you going to reintroduce foods and see if your problems come back, or if you just feel so good that this is how you're going to eat. And if you're not really feeling good, then it's probably not the source of the concerns. And you can kind of reintroduce some things. So this terminology of a leaky gut has come up a lot. It is controversial, as some don't believe this is a true problem or true diagnosis, but it refers to, like I was saying, that reduction in the tight junctions between the cells of the GI tract, which allows microbes or foreign material or byproducts through, causing that inflammatory reaction. H. pylori can affect these junctions. For people who are hypersensitive, like I said, that gluten, especially for people with celiac sensitivity or celiac disease, for sure that gluten can cause an inflammation reaction. Alcohol can cause damage to all of these cells that it has contact with, so that can cause some problems. Stress, age, inflammatory bowel disease, and Crohn's. So all of these kind of factors influence this potential for leaky guts. Now, as far as the gut microbiome, they're influenced by how we eat and what we eat. So we talked about how we want bacteria that are going to ferment that fiber and those carbohydrates, and less so the meat and the dairy. But if we have a lot of artificial sweeteners, if you have a lot of processed foods with additives and sugars and dyes and salt, that can also become a problem and reduce that diversity or affect our microbiome. It's kind of a little bit toxic to those gut bacteria. Red meat can be that as well, and for people who are sensitive to specific foods or have food allergies, that's going to be a problem too. Now, foods that can help, interesting, they look at bone broth for the glutamine and the collagen. We talked about collagen with skin health, but there's another option. Fermented foods can help, and we'll talk about why. Those probiotics, as a prebiotic. Foods high in fiber can stimulate that biodiversity, can stimulate that. Omega-3 foods high in omega-3 fats like fatty fish or walnuts or flax seeds, or those kind of foods. Turmeric as an anti-inflammatory agent. Mushrooms, green tea. So potentially Lactobacillus planitorium, bifidobacterium. So Lactobacillus bacteria and bifidobacterium bacteria are the predominant bacteria that we want to support the growth of. They're associated with better health and a good healthy microbiome. You can find a good variety of these in certain types of probiotics. One that I've recommended a lot in the past is VSL number 3. That actual name has changed to Bizbiome, I believe. So a lot of people ask about lectins. There's huge marketing on Dr. Gundry and the lectin conversation and research and stuff. Not exactly sure if it's all solid evidence-based. There is some research on limiting lectins and adding probiotics in management of autoimmune diseases, which I can understand if a person has inflammatory bowel disease or autoimmune diseases or any of these kind of things, it's certainly worthwhile to think about and look into. But remember, foods high in lectins like beans and whole grains have been shown to be beneficial in a wide range of diseases. So I don't know if we can just blanket say nobody should be eating those things. So I think it's something, to consider and take into context with everything else that's going on. As I mentioned, the microbiome can have an influence on obesity and diabetes. And it's interesting, it seems to be a relationship between that dysbiose, that altered microbiome in obese versus normal weight mice, and in different kinds of studies, different types of microbiome and bacteria species are better than others in pulling out more energy and extracting more energy from the food. So the microbiome might actually be adding to our energy intake from different kinds of foods. The firmicutes are being very efficient at extracting energy from the diet. The ratio can be altered on fat restricted or carbohydrate restricted diets or intermittent fasting. So there's studies that have found during times of fasting, increase in bacteria diets and less, and therefore you would have less of the bacteria that could pull extra energy out of the foods that we're eating. The dysbiose and a decrease in the short-chain fatty acid production has been seen with patients with diabetes, and that low bacteria diversity has been correlated with weight gain. So there are many pathways for communication between the gut microbiome and the brain. Cytokines, inflammatory components, hormones, the short-chain fatty acid, neurotransmitters. They can cross that brain barrier, affect the brain development, affect what's happening in function of the brain. Interesting mice that are germ-free showed impaired memory, hyperlocomotion, and anxiety. So not having a microbiome in those mice affected how their mood and their anxiety. It's very interesting. Our microbiome, carbohydrate fermentation may be linked to brain health. So again, what we're feeding the microbiome makes a difference. And so those whole grains, those fiber foods is going to be linked more to health. Studies have linked this dysbiose from infections or antibiotic use to increase risk of colon cancer. So several byproducts of the gut microbiome directly target intestinal cells and either mediate or encourage oncogenic, which is cancer causing, or cancer formation, or suppress tumor formation. So, these microbiomes seem to be having an effect even to that extent. And other cancers, alterations of gut microbiome have influenced incidence of cancers of the breast, liver, due to the inflammation and cytokine productions, and metabolic means. So potentially related to systemic distribution of the bacteria and the byproducts that compromise that integrity of the microbiome. So as we mentioned, the bacteria can influence how effective a medication can be. It can influence the creation or cause of cancer, but it also can influence some treatments. So the treatment for cancer can exert a toxic effect on the bacteria, promoting this dysbiose. Radiation therapy, transplant, irinotecan, 5-FU can be toxic to the gut microbiome and add to these unwanted side effects of to the intestinal tract. So gut microbiota may also influence the efficacy or the effectiveness of chemo. And irinotecan, which is very popular for GI cancers, opportunistic gut bacteria, the bad bacteria associated enzymes are able to react with the drug in the gut, contributing to the diarrhea for the medication. And that dysbiose contributes to infections and intestinal, graft versus host disease on people who are on transplants and have gone through those processes. So treatment can promote two opposite types of dysbiose. We can cause a detriment and benefit. So manipulation of the gut holds great promise as adjunct to improve the therapeutic effects of treatment. But we definitely need more research. A potential inhibitor of bacteria has been shown to protect mice from intestinal effects of irinotecan. So if we can inhibit certain types of bacteria in the gut, you wouldn't have as much of an effect of the irinotecan, so which is very interesting. A lot of more research needs to be done on that one, but is interesting for the future. Now, the immunotherapy treatments, we know the microbiota can help shape the immune system, and people on immunotherapy for melanoma, the anti-PD-1 checkpoint blockade medications, they did a study and they found that the people who had the most diverse gut microbiome had better response, 5 times more likely to respond to the immunotherapy than people who didn't have that good diverse gut microbiome. Probiotic supplementation in this study actually was not associated with that diversity. What helped create that diverse microbiome was a high fiber diet. So other studies with immune therapy found poor effectiveness in people who recently took antibiotics. And if you think about it, antibiotics are going to wipe away bacteria, and it's a very common side effect of antibiotic long-term use or recent use is that we disrupt the gut microbiome. People get antibiotic-related diarrhea from it. So if, for instance, you were on an antibiotic and then you started immunotherapy, you may, according to the study, it may not be quite as effective as if you can give yourself time to recover, so to speak. So as we mentioned, the diverse and multiple different effects of the microbiome on our overall health, depending on whether we're supporting good bacteria versus detrimental bacteria. So external influences on the gut and the diversity, our environment itself, what kind of bacteria, what kind of microbes are in our environment, the food we eat, feeding habits, temperature, the intestinal pH, myriad interactions with other bacteria in our food, in our gut, environmental temperature, peristalsis, how quickly our gut moves, bile acid, drugs that we take, and bacterial mucosal receptors. So not everything here we have a strong influence on, but certainly the type of food that we're eating, maybe our eating habits, can be part of how we can influence this microbiome diversity. So as we talked about, our artificial sweeteners can influence the microbiome, food additives, emulsifiers, reduce that gut diversity and increase inflammation. Restrictive diets. So even a gluten-free diet can decrease the amount of diversity in the microbiome because you're avoiding certain types of grains. So, and the average person who may not necessarily need the gut gluten-free, but is just doing it, may be impacting that biodiversity. So, severely restrictive diets can have that effect. Resistant starches can enrich bacterial groups in people who have, which will be variable in the starch and in the person. Resistant starches, I was just actually explaining this to a patient today. Resistant starches are created in a food through how it's cooked or through that food itself. It's similar to a fiber in that it changes the absorption and the impact of that starch onto the blood sugars. So resistant starches means it's going to be harder for the body to absorb those starches, and they may actually pass through. So for instance, some of the carbohydrates and the starches in beans and lentils, you will have some resistant starches. But the more interesting one that I always like to mention is potatoes. So a lot of diabetics, a lot of people will say potatoes are bad because there's a lot of carbohydrates and you spike your blood sugar. Well, interestingly enough, if you cook potatoes and then cool them, so for instance, you're making potato salad, which is a very classic thing to do, or you're just pre-cooking potatoes, making something, and then you put it in the refrigerator and eat it the next day. That cooling process with those starches actually creates some of these resistant starches. So in after the fact, there's less starch to spike your blood sugar than when you started, if that makes any sense. Fiber in the diet can significantly affect the GI microbiome, but it does only last as long as it's included in the diet. So for instance, you could go on a 1 week high fiber diet, let's say in these research studies or something, 1 week, 2 weeks, high fiber diet, and then you go back to normal. If they checked your microbiome at the end of those 2 weeks, they might see a great biodiversity. But if you go back to how you used to eat, would be significantly different, you're going to change your microbiome back. So it really is have lifestyle changes and something that needs to be persistent within the diet. So low fiber intake produces short chain fatty acids, leading to production of detrimental metabolism, degrading the colon microbiome. So we kind of talked about that along with the high fat. So as I was mentioning, resistant starches, we talked about the potatoes, the cooked and cooled. Same thing can happen with rice, actually. If you cook and cool the rice, it will form resistant starches. But green bananas versus a ripe banana, green bananas have more resistant starches. Plantains, legumes, lentils, peas, corn, seeds, your oats and your pumpernickel and your barley all have resistant starches. And you add that into other high fiber foods like peas and broccoli and greens and Brussels sprouts, your berries, your pears, your apples, carrots, and you get foods that can promote and support the growth of the diverse microbiome in your system. I mentioned berries. Between fiber, the resistant starches, polyphenols, so the nutrients that we get from berries and apples and all of those foods those polyphenols will also support the growth of the bacteria. So that's important as well. They act as a fuel source, so a prebiotic. So eating a high fiber diet full of these prebiotics, which are the fuel source, and probiotics, which are foods that already have healthy, good bacteria, is going to support that diversity. So dark green leafy vegetables, onions specifically are one of those prebiotics, a great fuel source. Artichokes as well, garlic, soybeans, beets, really great for the gut health. Your sweet potato, the butternut squash, apricots, cherries, kale, pineapple. Now I talked about probiotic rich foods. So that's going to be your fermented foods. So foods that already have a source of good bacteria are going to be important. So fermented foods are more diverse than taking probiotics themselves, especially if somebody's taking just Lactobacillus acidophilus, which I've had plenty of people say, oh yeah, I take a probiotic. What's in the probiotic? Oh, it's just Lactobacillus. That's fine. It's one strain, but there are hundreds, or we talked about even trillions of bacteria in our gut. So we don't want to isolate or just focus on one specific. So we want a diverse, and we want to support all of the bacteria growth. So fermented foods can give us a little bit more diversity. So kombucha, which is like a fermented tea, usually a fermented green tea, can contain 50 different probiotic strains versus a pill supplement that might only have 1 or 2. Yogurt, your kefir, sauerkraut, which is great. You're fermenting cabbage, which to punch there, kimchi, tempeh miso. So these fermented foods would introduce, and support more diverse probiotics in the system. Kombucha. Oh, and when we're looking at kombuchas, look for the drinks that are using fruit juice and not sugar to create the fermenting process of the tea. So Synergy, Pilot Kombucha, they using fruit juices. And then yogurt drinks like CG's plant-based probiotic yogurt or kefir. There are probiotic shots, Sunny Cultural, turmeric, ginger probiotic shots, Suja immunity, digestive shots. But again, look, they're using turmeric and ginger, which are 2 anti-inflammatory, immune boosting by herbs and foods we've talked about a lot as far as being just great for overall health. I've actually started using the golden milk powder for like a tea latte or in one of my smoothies or something like that. And that's turmeric, black pepper, cinnamon, ginger, and I think cardamom. It's a really nice powder combination. Put it with a plant-based milk, usually a chai tea or a green tea or something like that, and kind of it is a little spicy because of the black pepper, but good for boosting the immune system. Like I said, sauerkraut, fermented vegetables, miso. So these are your kind of fermented foods that are going to influence that diversity. Replacing saturated fats, trans fats with omega-3 fats. So your fish, your flaxseed, your olives, your nuts, these are going to support the diverse good bacteria, and they're going to be anti-inflammatory. So if we are eating or there's other reasons why we have inflammation in the gut, then these can kind of help reverse that or influence or reduce that inflammation. So things we don't have control over, these are going to help kind of reduce that impact as far as reducing inflammation in the gut and keeping the gut healthy. So I also always mention go out in the sun. So go out in the sun for short periods of time. We don't want to cause skin cancer here. So don't burn, but you want to support your production of vitamin D by going out in the sun. Now, if you can't do that and you're very concerned about skin cancer, take a vitamin D supplement. But the vitamin D itself supports that gut diversity. It also supports those junctions in the colon cells to keep them nice and healthy and strong. We do want to stay hydrated. Our whole body is 80% or something is water. So if we don't hydrate, if we don't replace fluids that we've lost, if you're not keeping the gut, the whole gut system and cells hydrated, then again, they can break down and they can loosen, and you can have a lot of these inflammation changes and problems. So changes in our diet can change the microbiome. It can happen within days, sometimes even 24 hours. And it can have a lasting effect on your health if you continue and make that a new lifestyle and a new a new way of eating. So kind of last minute, future directions that we want to see or that are coming forward. An analysis of that gut microbiome may predict patients likely to have immunotherapy colitis. So, knowing ahead of time what our microbiome looks like in a patient may be able to predict how they tolerate treatment, or if there's a specific mixture or grouping of bacteria that we can introduce to that system to make things better for the response to cancer treatment. I think that would be fabulous. Using the microbiome versus diets to predict glycemic response to meals, better control of blood sugars and diabetics, that would be great. And fecal transplants in treatment for either C. diff or even treatment for obesity, Alzheimer's, other diseases. So we do need technology for that personalized characterization of the gut and being able to manipulate that biome diversity. So I'm happy to take questions. Kind of want to go back to some of these screens that had the foods on. Chat box. Let me see what's in the chat box. Well, thank you everybody again for being here and listening.
I'm just going to say, well, I think we don't see any questions in the chat box or the Q&A, but I think we need a round of applause. That was pretty amazing, Marie.
Thank you.
Every time Marie presents to us, it's just amazing to me how much research she does on all of this and delivers it to us in a way that we can sort of understand it. And the good news is that I think we have to go back over, I know I do a lot of stuff, but the good news is that Marie does share her slides. She's so generous. So we can go back and look at these lists, and here's a question. Can you see it, Marie?
How do you do analysis of the microbiome? That's done in research studies in labs and stuff. They have different kind of tags or looking at byproducts. I don't understand the whole process. So it's not anything that can be readily available. It's done through the research studies. So right now, not everybody can be able to do that. Sure, explain some confusing items for us. Thanks, Marie. You're welcome, Bonnie. My screen says recording. Where is this being recorded? So we record all of the presentations, and then it will be uploaded onto our website, and that website link will be provided in your when you get your email for the
evaluations.
Right?
Yeah,
the evaluation.
Yeah, Lee will send it out in her evaluations. So
right. And when you go to that site, I believe that site will also have all of the old material. So we probably already have this on there from prior years somewhere, and the previous months lectures and stuff. So please peruse that website. There's a lot of great information there.
Yeah, I think that, yes, you've given a lecture on gut health before, but it seems like you have a lot of new and very interesting information on this one, hence the research.
Oh, it didn't come up, but I did want to mention I was actually reading this morning about milk, because a lot of people talk about milk and wonder about milk and dairy. So what they found is that milk and dairy, and they lump milk, kefir, and yogurt together, can increase the amount of the lactobacillus and the bifidobacterium in the gut. But there was some studies that found that drinking cow's milk could actually reduce the diversity of bacteria in the gut. So kind of back and forth still. when it comes to milk and dairy. Definitely what I don't think was bad. I think the only concern I would have is if you're drinking straight milk a lot, that you could decrease the diversity in the gut. But the fermented milks, obviously your yogurt and kefir, would be beneficial as far as introducing those good bacteria. Are walnuts perishable? Yes. And actually what I do, because I buy the big bag of walnuts in Costco, because we use so much with my father-in-law living with us. He loves walnuts. I actually keep the bag in my freezer, and I bring out just small portions to use for like the week or 2 weeks or whatever. So I would probably keep your nuts or seeds or something like that either in the refrigerator or in the freezer, because the oils can go rancid. So kind of keep that in mind.
Hey,
Other questions?
well, I have one more comment for
Sure.
for our audience. I think everyone can see and appreciate what good hands our patients are in. We see this with Marie and the other two dietitians on our staff. So Marie and Brandy and Katie, we're very grateful to each one of you for all that you do and how you care for our patients. So I did want to let everyone know about our upcoming lectures. This Friday, from our classic series, Dr. Patricia Jacobs is going to be presenting on what is symptom management. That will be this Friday from 12 until 12:45. Then our September lineup, on September 20th, one of our social workers, Elsa Rayner, will present on successful sleep, the tools to manage insomnia. That lecture will be from 11:30 until 12:15. On September 22nd, our physician panel will present a focus on prostate cancer. We will feature Dr. David Taub, urological oncology, Dr. Michael Casper, radiation oncology, and I just got a change this morning. It was going to be Dr. Berkowitz, but it's now going to be Dr. Edgar Castillo from medical oncology. On September 27th, again from our nutrition series, and Marie will be on men's health from 11:30 until 12:30. And by the way, the physician lecture is at 12 noon, from 12 to 12:45. So you will see the flyers. Lee will be sending everything out as she very diligently does. And so we hope you'll all join us. And thank you, Marie, for your research, your great presentation, and all that you do.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.